call.
Hard call. All right, more to come.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member for yielding briefly as I take another contribution in this committee stage debate. So I've actually got a couple of questions for the honourable member, Mr. Urafe, because as we commence this committee stage debate on this interesting, if short, piece of legislation, Mr. Urafe didn't make a contribution. And so we've had a few questions already. I'd like to add a couple to that. The clause that I don't have a question on is the Principal Act as laid out in Clause 3. That's very clear. I understand that entirely. And I think if a member doesn't understand what the meaning of that clause is, they probably shouldn't be in this place because it's very straightforward. Clause 1, the title clause, I actually would like to ask why the member chose to call it the Official Information Parliamentary Under-Secretaries, plural, amendment. Because, of course, there currently is only one Under-Secretary, and one might feel that it is somewhat targeted upon the only current Under-Secretary. So I'd just be interested in an assurance from Mr. Urafe that this is actually a high-minded point of principle and not simply targeting the only current Under-Secretary of State. I would like to know the answer to that question. The second, Mr. Urafe, is around the commencement clause, Clause 2, which says that this Act comes into force the day after it receives the royal assent. Now, I'd like to know from Mr. Urafe if he had in mind, when devising this clause, the retrospectivity of the OIA. It is inherently something which is designed to allow transparency on information that's been accumulated, generated and stored over a long period of time. And we've heard from the member, Mr. Seymour, the only current Under-Secretary under this national government, that he has put in place a very proactive approach to responding to official information requests, or in fact proactively releasing information before the requests are even made. Insofar as his education portfolio is concerned. So I'm not quite so sure whether he has that proactive measure in place on his arguably less controversial portfolio of regulatory reform. And if this bill comes into force immediately, the day after the royal assent, without any period to allow it to be bedded in, what kind of compliance burden that this might place on the smaller office of an Under-Secretary vis-a-vis, a larger office of a minister, be it a cabinet minister, a minister outside of cabinet, an associate minister, even a minister of state, although there's no one who holds that sinecure, obviously, under this hard-working national-led government. So the question there really is whether a day after the royal assent is sufficient, given over the course of 18 months or so that the member's been an Under-Secretary, a vast amount of information may be generated, accumulated, held, stored and processed by his office. He might have received, for all we know, many thousands of pieces of correspondence in the field of regulatory reform, because there are many letters written by admirers of this government, I'm sure, and the wonderful policies that have been implemented to make life easier for small business owners, cutting through the red tape. I'm sure he gets thousands of congratulatory cards on a daily basis from businesses up and down the country, be they in Clutha Southland or Dunedin North.
Order. Now, there is nothing in the debating phase that prevents members being ironic, but they still have to be relevant.
Mr. Speaker, how do you know he's being ironic?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sir, my point here, and the relevance to this particular clause is, I am concerned, and I hope Mr. Urafe will respond to this, that there could be a vast array of information generated in this modern, highly automated technical age in which we live, held by Mr. Seymour's office, which doesn't fall under that category that he's explained as being proactively released, and therefore has the member considered, the member proposing the bill, has he considered the impact that might place on a relatively low-resourced office when you compare it to the other offices of other ministers, that there would be a burden being placed on staff, perhaps public servants, what is the cost to the taxpayer that might bring? So I'd like some answers from the member, if possible.
Mr Chair.
Adrian Rurewhite.
Tēnā